A poor girl arrived without suit at the interview. Billionaire CEO chose her among 32 candidates. 31 pairs of eyes turned to watch her stand. Some looked curious. Most looked amused. All of them looked like they were watching a car accident about to happen. Have you felt every eye judging your clothes, your background, your right to be there? Hi, viewers. Kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. She walked into the boardroom with scuffed shoes and a wrinkled blouse, facing 32 candidates in designer suits. And somehow, she was the only one who made the billionaire lean forward. The bus ticket north had cost her grandmother's wedding ring, but Alicia carried something more valuable than gold: the fury of 18 years of unanswered questions. When Robert Whitman dismissed every Ivy League graduate for the girl from Mississippi, he wasn't being charitable. He was playing a game none of them understood. Have you ever walked into a room where you clearly didn't belong? Have you felt every eye judging your clothes, your background, your right to be there? Alicia faced that moment when survival meant standing taller than her fear. But what happens when the person who chooses you has secrets darker than your own? The 47th floor of the Whitman Tower stretched above Chicago like a throne room made of glass and steel. Alicia Crawford clutched her grandmother's worn Bible, the folded resume inside trembling against her sweaty palms. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Lake Michigan sparkled in the morning sun, but she couldn't appreciate the view. Not when 32 other candidates sat around her in perfect rows, their Italian leather briefcases and Armani suits making her thrift store blazer look like a costume. Next, called a receptionist with manicured nails that probably cost more than Alicia's bus fare. A blonde woman in a cream-colored suit that screamed wealth stood up, her heels clicking against the marble floor like a countdown timer. Harvard MBA? Probably. Maybe Wharton. The kind of woman who belonged in places like this, who spoke the language of power and privilege that Alicia had only learned from library books and late-night internet research. The whispers started the moment Alicia had walked in 2 hours ago. Hushed voices discussing her obvious poverty, her cheap clothes, her right to even be there. One man in a navy suit had actually laughed when she sat down, turning to his neighbor to make some joke she pretended not to hear. But she'd made it this far. From Jackson, Mississippi to Chicago, Illinois. From serving coffee at 3 in the morning to sitting in the most expensive office building she'd ever seen. The interview for strategic analyst at Whitman Enterprises was supposed to be her shot at rewriting the Crawford family story. Her chance to prove that a poor black girl from the South could stand tall in America's most ruthless boardrooms. Alicia Crawford, the receptionist, called. 31 pairs of eyes turned to watch her stand. Some looked curious. Most looked amused. All of them looked like they were watching a car accident about to happen. The conference room door opened to reveal Robert Whitman himself. 6 feet of controlled power in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her college tuition. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his jaw clean-shaven, his green eyes cold as winter lake water. At 34, he'd built Whitman Enterprises into a $14 billion empire spanning construction, real estate, and government contracts across New York, Texas, and California. Forbes called him ruthless. Wall Street Journal called him brilliant. The gossip blogs called him the most eligible bachelor in America. Alicia called him her last hope. "Miss Crawford," he said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made senators take notes. "Please sit." She walked to the chair across from him, aware that every step was being judged. Her shoes squeaked slightly against the polished floor. Her skirt, the nicest thing she owned, suddenly felt too short, too cheap, too obvious in its attempts to look professional. But when she met his eyes, something shifted. He wasn't looking at her clothes or her obvious lack of money. He was looking at her face like he was trying to solve a puzzle. "Tell me," Robert said, leaning back in his leather chair, "why should I hire you over the Harvard graduate who just left? Or the Yale woman before her? Or any of the other 31 candidates with better credentials, better connections, and better suits?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Alicia felt her heart hammering against her ribs, but she didn't look away. "Because," she said, her voice steadier than she felt, You didn't build a $14 billion empire by playing it safe. You built it by seeing value where others saw risk, by betting on potential instead of pedigree. She paused, letting her next words carry the weight of everything she'd survived. I'm not here because I have the right connections or the right family name. I'm here because I've got something none of them do. I know what it means to fight for every single thing I've earned. And that kind of hunger doesn't disappear when you put on expensive clothes. For 10 seconds that felt like 10 hours, Robert Whitman stared at her in complete silence. Then, without breaking eye contact, he pressed the intercom button. "Cancel the remaining interviews," he said. "Send everyone home." The receptionist's voice crackled through the speaker. "Sir, all of them. All of them." His eyes never left Alicia's face. "The position has been filled." Alicia's breath caught in her throat. Around the table, she could hear chairs scraping, voices rising in confusion and protest. But all of that felt distant, like background noise to the moment happening between her and the man who just changed her life. Robert stood, extending his hand across the table. "Welcome to Whitman Enterprises, Miss Crawford." When their hands touched, electricity shot up her arm. His fingers were warm, strong, and held hers for just a second longer than strictly professional. In that moment, with Chicago spread out 47 floors below them, Alicia felt something she hadn't experienced in years: hope. But hope, she was about to learn, could be the most dangerous emotion of all. What would you have done in that room? Would you have stayed and fought, or walked away? Tell me in the comments. As the elevator doors closed with just the two of them inside, Robert's first words weren't congratulations, they were a warning. "Tomorrow, we find out if choosing you was the biggest mistake of my career or the smartest move I've ever made." Day one at Whitman Enterprises, she expected orientation packets and employee handbooks. Instead, she got thrown into a merger negotiation worth $200 million and told to figure out. The elevator climbed to the 45th floor in silence, broken only by the soft jazz playing through hidden speakers. Alicia watched the numbers climb, each floor representing millions of dollars in deals, thousands of employees, and more power than she'd ever been close to in her life. "Nervous?" Robert asked without looking at her. "Should I be?" "Probably." He straightened his cufflinks, platinum, she noticed, with some kind of family crest. "The executives you're about to meet have been with this company for decades. They're not going to like me bringing in an outsider." The doors opened onto chaos. Phones ringing, assistants rushing between offices with stacks of documents, men in expensive suits shouting into headsets about stock prices and deadline extensions. This wasn't the calm, controlled environment Alicia had expected. This felt like a war room. "Miss Crawford." Robert's voice cut through the noise as he led her down a hallway lined with offices that looked like movie sets. "Let me be clear about something. I didn't hire you to be comfortable. I hired you to be useful. Today, you're going to prove which one you are." They stopped outside a conference room where 8 people in suits that cost more than most cars sat around a mahogany table covered in contracts and financial reports. Through the glass walls, Alicia could see them talking, gesturing, clearly stressed about something big. "Henderson Group merger," Robert said, checking his Rolex. $200 million deal that's been stuck for 3 weeks. "My senior team can't figure out why Henderson keeps balking at the final terms." He turned to face her, his green eyes unreadable. "You've got 2 hours to review the contracts and tell me what they're missing." Alicia's mouth went dry. 2 hours? I haven't even seen my office yet. Don't I get training, or... "This is your training." Robert opened the conference room door, and 8 pairs of eyes turned to stare at them. "Ladies and gentlemen, meet Alicia Crawford, our new strategic analyst. She's going to solve our Henderson problem." The silence that followed was deafening. An older man with silver hair and a face like carved granite spoke first. "Robert," he said carefully, "perhaps we should discuss this privately." "No need, Morrison." Robert's voice carried a warning that made the older man lean back in his chair. "Miss Crawford has my complete confidence. Don't you, Miss Crawford?" It was a test. A very public, very expensive test where failure meant humiliation in front of people who already thought she didn't belong. But as Alicia looked around the room at their skeptical faces, their whispered doubts, their obvious assumption that she'd fail, something fierce and familiar rose in her chest. She'd been underestimated her entire life. "Absolutely," she said, moving to take the empty chair at the table. "I'll need copies of all correspondence with Henderson Group, the original contract terms, and any internal memos about their concerns." For the next 2 hours, Alicia disappeared into the numbers. Profit margins, liability clauses, contractor agreements, environmental impact studies. The kind of dense legal and financial language that had intimidated her in business school, but made perfect sense when she remembered where she came from. Because here's what nobody in that room understood. Alicia Crawford had grown up watching construction crews, listening to her father talk about contracts and corner cutting, learning the language of building things from the ground up. And while these executives saw numbers on a page, she saw the human cost behind every clause. "Found it," she said, looking up to find Robert standing behind her chair. She hadn't heard him come in, but his presence made her skin warm in a way that had nothing to do with the stress of the situation. "Show me," he said, his voice dropping to that lower register she was starting to recognize. Alicia stood, aware that their bodies were closer than they should be in a professional setting, aware that he smelled like expensive cologne and something uniquely masculine. Henderson Group isn't worried about the money. They're worried about the workers. She pointed to a clause buried on page 43 of the contract. This section allows Whitman to use subcontractors without Henderson's approval. But Henderson's CEO, Marcus Henderson, built his company on treating workers fairly. He's not going to sign anything that lets you bring in cheaper labor and cut corners on safety. The room went quiet. Morrison frowned, flipping through his copy of the contract. Another executive, a woman with steel gray hair, leaned forward in her chair. "That's actually insightful," she admitted reluctantly. Robert's hand touched the small of Alicia's back, just for a second, but the contact sent heat racing through her body. "What do you recommend?" "Give Henderson oversight on all subcontractor selection. Add a clause guaranteeing prevailing wages and safety standards. He'll sign within a week." "That'll cost us millions in profit," Morrison protested. "It'll make us billions in reputation," Alicia shot back. "Henderson Group has contracts with the federal government. You want those referrals? You prove you can be trusted with workers' lives." Robert was quiet for a long moment, studying her face like he was seeing something he hadn't expected. Finally, he nodded. "Do it," he told Morrison. "Revise the contract with Ms. Crawford's recommendations." As the room emptied, executives filing out with grudging respect and curious glances, Robert remained behind. They were alone now, the setting sun painting Chicago gold through the windows. "Impressive," he said, moving closer. "You solved in 2 hours what my team couldn't figure out in 3 weeks." "I had an advantage," Alicia said, suddenly hyper-aware of how close he was standing. "I know what it's like to work construction, to worry about whether your boss cares if you make it home alive." Something shifted in Robert's expression. "Your father?" The question hit like a punch to the chest. Alicia had mentioned her father's construction background in the interview, but the way Robert asked, like he already knew the answer, made her stomach clench with sudden suspicion. "What about my father?" she asked carefully. Robert's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Nothing. Just understanding your background helps me understand your perspective." But there was something in his tone, something in the way he wouldn't quite meet her eyes, that made Alicia wonder what Robert Whitman wasn't telling her. "Have you ever been thrown into the deep end at work? How did you survive your first day in a hostile environment? Share your experience below." When she cracked the merger problem that had stumped his senior team for weeks, Robert's expression shifted from doubt to something more dangerous, recognition. "Meet me in my office after everyone leaves," he said quietly. "We need to talk about why you're really here." The billionaire's private office after midnight felt like a confession booth, except neither of them was ready to admit their sins. Chicago glittered 47 floors below like scattered diamonds on black velvet. The Whitman Tower stood silent around them, empty except for security guards and the cleaning crew working floors they'd never see. In Robert's private office, Amber whiskey sat untouched in crystal glasses while two people circled truths neither wanted to speak first. "You know, don't you?" Alicia said, standing by the windows with her arms crossed. She'd kicked off her cheap heels hours ago, and her stocking feet made no sound on the thick carpet. "About my father." Robert sat behind his mahogany desk, his tie loosened, his usually perfect hair slightly mussed from running his fingers through it. Even disheveled, he looked like he belonged in magazines. All sharp angles and controlled power. But his eyes held something she hadn't seen before. Guilt. "James Crawford," he said finally. "Construction supervisor. Worked for Harrison Building Company, one of our subsidiaries. Good man, from what I heard." "Heard?" Alicia turned from the window, her heart starting to race. "You never met him?" "I was young when—" Robert stopped, poured himself 2 fingers of whiskey, then thought better of it and pushed the glass away untouched. "Tell me what you remember about when he left." "He didn't leave." The words came out sharper than Alicia intended. "He disappeared. One day he was there talking about some problems at work, some things that weren't right. The next day he was gone. No goodbye. No explanation. Just gone." She moved closer to his desk, her bare feet silent on the carpet. "My mother waited 2 years for him to come back. Made excuses to the neighbors, told me he was working out of state. But I knew. Even at 14, I knew he wasn't coming home." Robert's hands clenched into fists on the desktop. "Alicia." 18 years, she continued, her voice breaking slightly. 18 years of wondering if he left because he didn't love us enough to stay. 18 years of my mother working 3 jobs because the man who promised to take care of us just vanished." She reached his desk, placing her palms flat on the polished wood. "So when I ask if you know something about my father, I need the truth. All of it." For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the air conditioning and the distant traffic 47 floors below. Robert looked at her across the desk, really looked at her, and she saw him making some kind of calculation, weighing risks she couldn't understand. "Your father worked construction for Harrison Building Company," Robert said slowly. "They had a contract to build 3 federal courthouses in Mississippi, Alabama, and Louisiana. Big money. The kind of project that can make or break a company. I know all that. What I don't know is why he found irregularities." Robert's voice cut through hers like a blade. "In the materials, substandard concrete, cheap steel, safety violations that could have gotten people killed. Your father documented everything, brought it to his supervisors." Alicia's breath caught. And he was told to keep quiet, to look the other way. The project was too big, too important, too connected to people with power. Robert stood, moving around the desk to stand closer to her. "Your father refused." The room felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in as pieces of puzzle Alicia had been trying to solve her entire adult life finally started clicking into place. "He was going to blow the whistle," she whispered. "He was going to expose everything. The corruption, the bribes, the corners being cut that could have killed federal judges and court employees." Robert's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "He was going to destroy people with connections that went all the way to Washington. So they destroyed him first." Robert's silence was answer enough. Alicia felt her knees go weak, and suddenly Robert's hands were on her arms, steadying her, pulling her closer to his chest. She could smell his cologne, feel the warmth of his body through his white dress shirt, hear his heart beating fast against her ear. "How do you know all this?" she asked, her voice muffled against his shoulder. His arms tightened around her. "Because I was there." The words hit her like cold water. Alicia pulled back, staring up into his face, searching for lies and finding only painful truth. "You were there," she repeated slowly. "You were. How old were you?" 22. Fresh out of Harvard Business School, working for my father's company during the summer." Robert's hands moved to cup her face, his thumbs brushing away tears she didn't realize had fallen. "I was supposed to learn the family business. Instead, I learned what happens when good men stand up to powerful people." "What happened to him?" Alicia asked, though part of her was afraid of the answer. Robert's eyes searched her face like he was memorizing it. "Some doors are better left closed, Alicia." But as she headed for the exit, Her bare feet cold against the marble floor of the hallway, his voice stopped her. Unless you're prepared for what you might find behind them. When was the last time someone's simple touch left you breathless? Share your story in the comments. She came to work the next morning with one mission: crack the mystery of her father's disappearance. But Robert Whitman had other plans, starting with a business trip that would change everything. Houston, Robert announced without preamble when Alicia knocked on his office door at exactly 8 a.m. We leave in an hour. She'd spent the entire night staring at her apartment ceiling, replaying their conversation, analyzing every word and gesture for clues about what he wasn't telling her. The revelation that he'd been there when her father disappeared had left her reeling, but it had also given her something she'd never had before: a direction to channel 18 years of questions. I don't have anything packed, she said, still wearing yesterday's skirt, because she'd been too wired to go home and change. We'll buy what you need when we get there. Robert is already moving, grabbing files from his desk, checking his phone. The Henderson Group wants to meet in person to finalize the merger terms. Your insights yesterday convinced them we're serious about worker protections. You could handle that meeting without me. Robert stopped, looked at her with those green eyes that seemed to see straight through every defense she'd built. I could, but then you'd spend the day digging through company files looking for information about your father, and we both know that's a dangerous path to go down alone. Heat flooded her cheeks. He knew exactly what she'd been planning. So instead, you're taking me on a business trip? I'm keeping you close. His voice dropped to that lower register that made her skin tingle. Houston has some of our oldest construction contracts. If you want answers about what happened 18 years ago, that's where we'll find them. An hour later, they were 30,000 feet above the clouds in Robert's private jet. Alicia had never been on a plane smaller than a commercial airliner, and the intimacy of the cabin. Just 8 leather seats, a conference table, and a bedroom she was trying not to think about made her hyper-aware of every breath, every movement. Tell me about growing up in Mississippi, Robert said, settling into the seat across from her with a cup of coffee and what looked like financial reports. Why? Because I want to understand you. He set the papers aside, giving her his full attention. Yesterday, you solved the problem that stumped my entire executive team. You saw something they missed because you understood both sides, the business side and the human side. That kind of insight doesn't come from textbooks. Alicia tucked her legs under her, suddenly conscious that she was wearing the same clothes as yesterday and probably looked as tired as she felt. You want to understand me, or you want to understand how to use me? Robert's smile was sharp as a blade. Can it be both? That depends on whether you see me as a person or a tool. Right now, he said, his eyes traveling from her face down to her lips and back up again. I'm having trouble seeing you as anything but a beautiful woman who's making it very difficult for me to concentrate on business. The words hit her like an electric shock. Alicia had never been the kind of woman men said things like that to. She'd been too busy working, too focused on surviving to pay attention to attraction or chemistry. But sitting across from Robert Whitman at 30,000 feet, she suddenly understood why romance novels spent so many pages describing the way a man's voice could make a woman's pulse race. Mr. Whitman. Robert. His voice was rough now, lower. When it's just us, call me Robert. Robert, she repeated, and liked the way his name felt on her tongue. This isn't appropriate. You're my boss. You're right. But he didn't look away, didn't move back to his papers. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, closing the distance between them. Tell me to stop. Stop what? Looking at you like I want to know what you taste like. Stop imagining what you'd sound like saying my name when you're not thinking about being professional. His eyes were dark now, intense. Stop wanting you in ways that have nothing to do with merger contracts and business strategy. Alicia's breath caught in her throat. She should tell him to stop. Should remind him about sexual harassment policies and power dynamics and all the reasons why this was a terrible idea. Instead, she found herself asking, what would happen if I didn't tell you to stop? The jet hit turbulence at exactly the wrong moment, throwing Alicia forward out of her seat. Robert's arms came up instinctively, catching her, pulling her against his chest as the plane steadied. For a moment they stayed like that, Her hands pressed to his shoulders, his arms around her waist, their faces inches apart. "If you didn't tell me to stop," Robert said, his breath warm against her lips, "I'd kiss you until you forgot every reason why this is complicated. And then what? Then I'd spend the rest of this flight showing you exactly how much I want you." His thumb traced her lower lip, making her shiver. "But first, I make sure you wanted me to. Not because I'm your boss or because I can give you things you need, but because when you look at me, you feel the same fire I feel when I look at you." The plane's intercom crackled to life. "Mr. Whitman, we'll be beginning our descent into Houston in 20 minutes. The spell broke. Alicia pulled back, returning to her seat, suddenly aware of how close they'd come to crossing a line that would change everything. Robert ran a hand through his hair, his breathing slightly uneven. We should review the Henderson files before we land," Alicia said, her voice not quite steady. "Yes." Robert reached for his briefcase, but his eyes stayed on her face. "We should." But as the plane descended toward Houston, carrying them toward answers about her father and deeper into whatever was building between them, Alicia wondered if she was flying toward salvation or straight into the most beautiful disaster of her life. What would you do if your boss became the key to unlocking your family's biggest mystery? Would you trust them with your secrets? Share your thoughts below. When she found her father's termination records in Robert's private files, her hands shook. The signature at the bottom belonged to someone she'd never heard of, but the witness signature was unmistakably Robert's, dated just 3 months after his 22nd birthday. He'd lied about everything. Confronting a billionaire about betraying your family requires courage. Confronting him when you're falling for him requires something else entirely. The hotel suite overlooked downtown Houston's glittering skyline, but Alicia couldn't appreciate the view. Not when her father's termination papers were spread across the king-size bed like evidence at a crime scene. Not when Robert's signature, younger, less confident than his current bold scrawl, but unmistakably his, stared back at her from the bottom of the page that had destroyed her family. James Crawford, terminated for cause. Effective immediately. Unauthorized disclosure of proprietary information. Proprietary information. Alicia's voice cracked as she read the words aloud. They called it proprietary information when he tried to save people's lives. Rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows, turning Houston into a blur of lights and shadows. She'd found the files in Robert's briefcase while he was in the shower, looking for the Henderson Group contracts, and finding instead the documentation of her father's professional execution. The bathroom door opened, steam billowing out as Robert emerged wearing nothing but a towel around his waist. His hair was damp, water droplets tracing paths down his chest, and under different circumstances, Alicia might have been distracted by the sight of him. Instead, all she could see was the signature that had haunted her dreams. "You lied to me," she said, holding up the termination letter. Robert went still, his eyes moving from her face to the papers scattered across the bed. She watched the exact moment he realized what she'd found, saw his jaw tighten, his shoulders square for battle. "Alicia, don't." She stood up, the letter trembling in her hand. "Don't you dare say my name like you care about me. Not when you've been lying since the moment we met. I never lied to you. You said you were there. You said you learned what happens when good men stand up to powerful people." Her voice rose, fury and heartbreak tangling together. "You didn't tell me you were one of the people who crushed him." Robert moved closer, the towel riding low on his hips, but Alicia backed away until she hit the window, the cold glass against her back a shock that matched the chill in her heart. "I was 22 years old," Robert said, his voice rough with something that might have been regret. "Fresh out of business school, working for my father's company. I didn't understand. You signed the papers." Alicia thrust the letter at him. "Your signature is right there, witnessing his termination. You were part of it. I was ordered to be part of it." Robert's control cracked, emotion bleeding through his usual composure. "You think I had a choice? You think a 22-year-old kid could stand up to executives who'd been running that company since before I was born? My father did." The words hung between them like a slap. Robert's face went white, and for a moment, Alicia saw past the billionaire CEO to the young man who'd been forced to sign away another man's life. Your father was brave, Robert said quietly. Braver than I was. He chose to do the right thing, and it cost him everything. He took a step closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. I chose to survive, and I've been paying for that choice every day since. Paying for it. Alicia laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. You built a $14 billion empire. You live in penthouse apartments and fly in private jets. How exactly are you paying? By remembering his face. Robert's green eyes were dark with pain now. By knowing that a good man lost everything because I was too weak to stand up for what was right. By building this company into something that would never again destroy families the way we destroyed yours. Thunder crashed outside, matching the storm building in Alicia's chest. She wanted to hate him, had expected to hate him when she finally learned the truth about her father's disappearance. But looking at Robert now, vulnerable, guilty, genuinely tortured by a choice he'd made as barely more than a boy, she found her anger warring with something more dangerous. Understanding. He had bribes being paid to secure contracts. Robert continued, moving closer until she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. Your father discovered that executives were paying off inspectors to overlook safety violations, environmental regulations, worker protection standards. The federal courthouse projects were worth hundreds of millions, and people were willing to kill to protect that money. So they killed his career instead. They tried. Robert's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. But your father was smarter than they gave him credit for. He documented everything. Names, dates, amounts. He had enough evidence to bring down half the construction industry in the South. Alicia's breath caught. What happened to the evidence? I don't know. Robert's thumb traced her lower lip, and despite everything, her body responded to his touch. He disappeared before anyone could find it. Some people think he's dead. Others think he went into hiding. What do you think? I think, Robert said, his voice dropping to that husky register that made her pulse race, that if James Crawford was smart enough to gather that kind of evidence, he was smart enough to stay alive long enough to use it. The possibility that her father might still be alive hit Alicia like lightning. For 18 years, she'd mourned him, had built her entire identity around being the daughter abandoned by the man who was supposed to protect her. But what if he hadn't abandoned them? What if he'd been protecting them the only way he could? Why are you telling me this now? She asked. Robert's other hand came up to frame her face, tilting her chin up until she had no choice but to meet his eyes. Because I can't stand the way you look at me when you think I destroyed your family. Because I've been falling for you since you walked into that boardroom. And I need you to know that everything I've done since that day has been about trying to make up for what I couldn't do when I was 22. Robert, he kissed her before she could finish the thought. Kissed her like he was drowning and she was air, like he was confessing sins and seeking absolution all at once. His lips were warm, demanding, desperate, and despite every logical reason she should push him away, Alicia found herself kissing him back. She kissed him like she hated him, all teeth and fury, but when he pulled back to search her eyes, she was the one who whispered, "Don't stop," against his mouth. Because sometimes the person who destroys you is the same person who saves you, and sometimes the only way to heal from betrayal is to choose trust again, especially when it terrifies you. Have you ever wanted someone you should hate? Someone who represented everything that hurt you? How did you handle that conflict? Share below. As they lay tangled in silk sheets, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Your father isn't dead. If you want to find him, stop trusting the man who buried him alive. Robert was asleep beside her, but suddenly she wondered if she was lying next to her salvation or her destruction. The anonymous text message should have sent her running. Instead, it sent her deeper into Robert Whitman's dangerous world, where love and betrayal dance on the same razor's edge. Alicia stared at her phone screen until the words blurred together, her heart hammering so loud she was sure it would wake Robert. The message had come through at 3:17 a.m. from a number she didn't recognize, but the timing felt deliberate, like someone had been watching, waiting for the perfect moment to shatter whatever piece she'd found in Robert's arms. Your father isn't dead. 3 words that changed everything. Again, she slipped out of bed, careful not to disturb the silk sheets, and padded barefoot to the bathroom. In the mirror, she looked exactly like what she was, a woman who'd just made love to a man she wasn't sure she could trust, a woman whose entire understanding of her life had been turned upside down twice in 24 hours. The phone buzzed again. Same unknown number. Parking garage. Level B3. Come alone. 1 hour. Alicia's hand shook as she typed back. Who is this? No response. She looked back toward the bed where Robert slept, his dark hair messy against the white pillow, one arm stretched out where she'd been lying moments before. Even asleep, he looked like a man who carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. Or maybe there was just guilt. 45 minutes later, she was walking through the underground parking garage of their Houston hotel, her footsteps echoing off concrete walls. The air smelled like motor oil and exhaust, a sharp contrast to the luxury they'd been surrounded by upstairs. She'd left Robert a note saying she needed air, needed to think, needed space to process everything he'd told her. She hadn't mentioned the text. Miss Crawford. The voice came from behind a concrete pillar, and Alicia spun around to find a woman in her 50s with graying hair, pulled back in a tight bun. She wore jeans and a jacket that had seen better days, and her eyes held the kind of wariness that came from years of looking over her shoulder. You came, the woman said, stepping into the harsh light of the parking garage. Smart girl, just like your father. You know my father? I worked with him. Sandra Martinez. I was a project supervisor at Harrison Building Company back when your daddy discovered what they were doing to those courthouse contracts. Alicia's breath caught. This woman had been there, had seen what happened to her father firsthand. The text said he's alive. Sandra nodded, glancing around the parking garage like she expected trouble to emerge from the shadows. He is. Been in witness protection for 18 years, waiting for the right moment to come forward with the evidence he gathered. Witness protection? But that means the FBI has been building a case all this time. Your father's testimony is the key to bringing down a corruption ring that goes from Houston to Washington, D.C. Sandra pulled a manila envelope from her jacket. But there's a problem. Alicia took the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside were photographs, surveillance photos of her and Robert at dinner, getting on the private jet, entering the hotel together. Her stomach dropped to her shoes. They know you're getting close to the truth, Sandra said. And they know Robert Whitman has feelings for you. That makes you a target, honey. Both of you. Robert isn't part of this anymore. He was just a kid when. Robert Whitman owns the company that buried your father's career. His signature is on the termination papers. You think these people care about his motives? Sandra's voice was sharp with urgency. They've already put a price on your head. The only question is whether your boyfriend is going to protect you or save his empire. Alicia's phone buzzed. Robert, probably wondering where she'd gone. I need to see him, she said. My father. I need to talk to him. Can't happen yet. Too dangerous. But, Sandra hesitated, then reached into her jacket again. He wanted you to have this. It was a letter written in handwriting Alicia recognized from birthday cards and homework help from 18 years ago. Her father's careful script, the way he dotted his I's and crossed his T's. She could barely see the words through her tears. My beautiful daughter, it began. If you're reading this, then you've learned the truth about why I had to leave. I know you must hate me for abandoning you and your mother, but I need you to understand. Everything I did was to keep you safe. The letter went on to explain how he'd gathered evidence of bribery, kickbacks, and safety violations that could have killed dozens of federal employees. How he tried to work within the system, only to discover that the corruption went deeper than he'd imagined. How leaving his family was the only way to protect them from people who would kill to keep their secrets buried. But most importantly, the letter concluded, I need you to know that not a day has gone by that I haven't thought about you and your mother. I've watched from a distance as you grew into the strong, brilliant woman I always knew you'd become. And now that you're close to someone with the power to expose these criminals, I'm terrified that my fight might cost you everything I sacrificed 18 years to protect. Alicia looked up to find Sandra watching her with sympathetic eyes. He's proud of you, you know. The way you've built a life for yourself. The way you're not backing down from this fight. But he's also scared. These people don't just destroy careers, honey. They eliminate problems. What am I supposed to do? Be careful who you trust. Even people who say they love you. Sandra turned to go, then stopped. And maybe especially them. When Alicia returned to the hotel room, Robert was awake, sitting on the edge of the bed in boxers and a white t-shirt, his hair still mussed from sleep. He looked up as she entered, relief flooding his features. "Where did you go?" "I was worried." She held up a coffee cup she'd bought from the lobby as cover. Couldn't sleep. Needed caffeine and fresh air. But as she looked at him, this man who'd just shown her passion and tenderness she'd never experienced, this man who claimed to be trying to make up for past mistakes, she wondered if Sandra was right. If the person you love could also be the person who destroys you. And if sometimes the only way to survive love was to be willing to lose it. What would you choose? Love with someone who might have destroyed your family, or justice that might destroy your heart? Tell me what you'd do. When Robert found her meeting with the informant, his face went white. "You don't understand what you're risking," he said, gripping her shoulders. "These people don't just destroy careers, Alicia. They eliminate problems." But her response stopped him cold. "Then we better make sure I'm not their problem anymore." She became a double agent in designer heels, loving the billionaire by night, investigating his crimes by day, never knowing which side would destroy her first. Back in Chicago, Alicia threw herself into work with an intensity that impressed even Robert's demanding executives. She arrived early, stayed late, and attacked every project like her life depended on it. Which, according to Sandra Martinez, it might. "You're different," Robert said, watching her from across the conference table where she was presenting quarterly projections to the board. "Since Houston. More focused. More paranoid," she thought but didn't say. More aware that every conversation could be her last. More conscious that the man she was falling in love with might be the same man who would ultimately have to choose between her life and his empire. "I'm learning," she said instead, clicking to the next slide. "You threw me into the deep end. I'm just trying not to drown." After the meeting, she waited until the boardroom emptied before approaching Robert. He was gathering his papers, but when she moved closer, his attention shifted entirely to her. "Dinner tonight?" he asked, his voice dropping to that intimate register that made her pulse race despite everything. "I can't. I have plans." "Cancel them." The command in his tone sent heat straight to her belly, but it also reminded her of what Sandra had said about powerful men who were used to getting what they wanted, about how they treated people as possessions rather than partners. "I said I can't." Robert set down his files and moved closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, feel the heat radiating from his body. "What plans?" "Personal ones." His green eyes searched her face like he was looking for lies. "Are you avoiding me?" "Yes," she thought, "because I'm trying to figure out if you're going to save me or sacrifice me when this all comes crashing down." "No," she said instead. "I'm just trying to maintain some balance. This thing between us, it's complicated enough without spending every waking moment together." Robert's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her lower lip. The touch sent fire through her veins, and she had to fight not to lean into him. "What if I don't want balance?" he asked. "What if I want to spend every waking moment with you?" Before she could answer, his mouth was on hers, kissing her with a desperation that felt like hunger and possession and something close to fear. She kissed him back because her body betrayed every logical thought in her head, because despite everything, she wanted him with an intensity that scared her. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Robert's forehead rested against hers. "Come home with me tonight," he whispered. "Let me show you how much I've missed touching you." "Robert, let me remind you how good we are together." God, she wanted to lose herself in his hands, his mouth, his body moving against hers. But Sandra's warning echoed in her head. "Be careful who you trust. Even people who say they love you." "I really can't," she said, stepping back before she could change her mind. But maybe tomorrow. The disappointment in his eyes was quickly replaced by something that looked almost like suspicion. What aren't you telling me, Alicia? Everything, she thought. That someone contacted me about my father. That he's alive and in witness protection. That you're in danger because of me, and I'm in danger because of you, and I don't know how to protect either of us. Nothing, she lied. I just need some time to process everything that's happened between us. That night, instead of going home, Alicia sat in her car outside a diner on Chicago's South Side, waiting for Sandra Martinez to show up with more information about her father's case. The FBI had been building their investigation for 18 years, Sandra had explained. They were close to making arrests, but they needed more evidence to connect the corruption to current operations. Evidence that might exist in Whitman Enterprises files. When Sandra slid into the passenger seat, she handed Alicia a small device that looked like a thumb drive. What is it? Insurance, Sandra said. Plug it into any computer on the Whitman network, and it'll copy files related to the Harrison building contracts. Your father's termination. The courthouse projects. Everything. Alicia stared at the device. You're asking me to spy on the company I work for. I'm asking you to help finish what your father started. And if I get caught? Sandra's silence was answer enough. 2 days later, Alicia was working late in the office when she heard Robert's voice in the hallway, talking to security about extending her access privileges. The irony wasn't lost on her. He was giving her more access to the company files at the exact moment she was planning to steal from them. She waited until the building was empty except for the night security guards, then made her way to Robert's office. Her key card worked, another gift of trust that made her stomach twist with guilt. The thumb drive slid into his computer like a secret she couldn't take back. While it copied files, Alicia stood at the window overlooking Chicago, wondering if she was saving her father or destroying the first man she'd ever truly loved. When the copying finished, she pocketed the drive and prepared to leave. But as she reached for the door handle, it turned from the outside. Robert stepped in, his face unreadable in the dim light from the hallway. Working late? He asked quietly. Just finishing up some research. Research. He moved closer, and she could see something dangerous in his eyes. On my computer. In my office. After hours. Her heart started racing. I needed access to the merger files. The merger files are on the shared drive. His voice was deadly quiet now. What are you really doing here, Alicia? Have you ever had to choose between loyalty and truth? Between protecting someone and exposing them? Share your story in the comments. The break-in at her apartment was professional. Nothing stolen, just a message spray-painted on her mirror. Stop digging or join Daddy permanently. When Robert arrived to find her packing, his face told her everything she needed to know. He'd been expecting this. Sometimes the man you're falling in love with is the same man who destroyed your life. And sometimes that makes him the only one who can save it. Alicia's apartment looked like a crime scene. Furniture overturned, drawers pulled out, papers scattered across the floor like fallen leaves. But it was the message spray-painted across her bathroom mirror that made her blood run cold. Stop digging or join Daddy permanently. She stood in her doorway with a suitcase in one hand and her phone in the other, trying to decide who to call first, the police or Robert. The decision was made for her when his black Mercedes pulled up to the curb, and he got out running like a man afraid he was too late. Jesus Christ, he breathed when he saw the destruction. Are you hurt? How did you know? She asked instead of answering. I haven't called anyone yet. Robert's jaw tightened. Because I've had security watching your building since Houston. You've been having me followed? I've been having you protected. His green eyes were dark with something that looked like fear. These people don't send warning messages, Alicia. They eliminate problems. The fact that they broke in without hurting you means they're trying to scare you off instead of killing you. That buys us time, but not much. Us. She set down her suitcase, suddenly exhausted by the weight of secrets and half-truths. There's no us, Robert. There's you protecting your empire and me trying to find the truth about my father. Those aren't the same thing. They are now. Robert moved closer, stepping carefully around the debris of her life. Because whoever did this knows about Houston. They know we're together. They know you mean something to me. Doi. The question came out smaller than she'd intended. Means something to you? You mean everything to me. His voice was rough with emotion. Which is why you can't stay here. Pack whatever you need. You're coming home with me. I'm not your responsibility. You are now. Robert's hands framed her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. The moment I decided to hire you instead of walking away, the moment I told you the truth about your father, the moment I fell in love with you, you became my responsibility. The words hit her like a physical blow. You love me. I love you. He said it like a confession, like an apology, like a prayer all at once. I love your strength, your intelligence, your refusal to be intimidated by anyone or anything. I love the way you see solutions that everyone else misses. I love the way you make me want to be the man I should have been 18 years ago. Alicia felt tears she'd been holding back for days finally spill over. I don't know if I could trust you. I know. Robert's thumbs brushed the tears from her cheeks. I know I've given you every reason to doubt me, but I need you to listen to something, and I need you to believe me when I tell you it's the truth. He pulled out his phone, scrolled through his contacts, and hit call. The phone rang twice before a gravelly voice answered. Whitman. Dad, Robert said, his eyes never leaving Alicia's face. I need you to tell someone the truth about James Crawford. There was a long pause. Then, Robert, we agreed never to. The agreement's off. His daughter is here with me, and people are trying to kill her because of choices we made 18 years ago. Robert's voice was steel now. Tell her what really happened. Another pause, then Robert held the phone out to Alicia. Talk to him. With trembling fingers, she took the phone. Hello, Miss Crawford. The older man's voice was tired, heavy with years of carrying guilt. My son didn't tell you the whole truth about your father's termination. Alicia sank on her overturned couch. What truth? Robert didn't sign those papers willingly. When your father brought us the evidence of corruption in the courthouse contracts, we wanted to report it immediately. But our business partners, men with connections to organized crime, made it clear that anyone who testified would be eliminated, along with their families. The room started spinning. What are you saying? I'm saying they threatened to kill Robert if we didn't fire your father and bury his evidence. So we made a choice. The older man's voice broke slightly. We sacrificed one good man to save my son, but they let my father live because he was smart enough to disappear with copies of everything before they could get to him. He's been in federal protection ever since, building a case that will put these animals behind bars. Alicia looked up at Robert, who was watching her with eyes full of pain and hope and desperate love. Why are you telling me this now? She asked. Because, Robert's father said, my son is willing to risk everything, his company, his life, his future, to protect you. And because it's time to finish where your father started, even if it destroys everything we built. When she hung up, the apartment was quiet except for the sound of traffic outside and her own racing heartbeat. They threatened to kill you, she said. Robert nodded. And they'll do it now if they think I'm going to help you expose them. So what do? We fight back. Robert's smile was sharp as a blade. We give your father the ammunition he needs to bury these bastards once and for all. Even if it costs you your company, the company isn't worth your life. Robert pulled her against his chest, holding her tight. Nothing is worth your life. When someone you love has been both your destroyer and your protector, how do you move forward? Have you experienced that kind of complex relationship? Tell me below. When a secure phone rang with her father's voice after 18 years of silence, she broke down. But his first words weren't, I love you, or I missed you. They were, don't trust Robert Whitman. He's not who you think he is, and neither am I. The father she'd mourned for 18 years was alive, hidden, and warning her against the man she loved, but family reunions and witness protection come with rules that could kill them all. The federal safe house looked like every suburban home in America. Beige siding, small front yard, generic landscaping that screamed, nothing to see here. But the two agents flanking the entrance and the cameras hidden in the porch lights told a different story. This was a fortress disguised as normal, a place where secrets went to hide from the world. Alicia sat in the passenger seat of Robert's Mercedes, her hands shaking as she stared at the house where her father had been living under an assumed name for 18 years. Agent Sarah Chun, the FBI handler who'd arranged this meeting, had made the rules clear. 1 hour, supervised conversation, no physical contact, no sharing of current addresses or phone numbers. I could wait in the car, Robert offered quietly. No. Alicia's voice was steadier than she felt. If we're doing this together, we're doing it together. The living room was decorated with furniture that came from the same catalog as 1,000 other witness protection properties. Beige couch, glass coffee table, landscape paintings that meant nothing to anyone. But none of that mattered when the man, sitting in the armchair, looked up and she saw her own dark eyes staring back at her. James Crawford had aged 18 years in the space of a heartbeat. His hair was silver now instead of black, his face lined with wrinkles that spoke of sleepless nights and constant worry. But when he stood up, when his face broke into a smile that was purely joy and heartbreak combined, he was still her daddy. "My beautiful girl," he said, his voice thick with unshed tears. "Look at you. You're so strong, so grown up. I knew you would be, but seeing you—" Alicia wanted to run to him, to collapse in his arms like she was 14 again and the world made sense. But Agent Chin's presence in the corner of the room reminded her that even this reunion came with rules designed to keep them all alive. "Daddy," the word came out broken, like she hadn't said it in years. Which she hadn't. "I thought you were dead." "I know, baby. I know, and I'm sorry." "God, I'm so sorry." James turned to look at Robert, and his expression hardened. But not as sorry as some people should be. Robert stepped forward, his hands loose at his sides in a gesture that somehow managed to look both respectful and ready for a fight. "Mr. Crawford, I know you have no reason to." "You're right." James's voice cut through Robert's words like a blade. "I don't. You signed the papers that destroy my life. Your family's company buried evidence that could have saved lives. And now you're sleeping with my daughter." "Dad." Alicia's voice carried a warning. "It's not that simple, isn't it?" James moved closer to Robert, and despite being older and smaller, he somehow managed to look dangerous. This man represents everything that went wrong 18 years ago. His company, his family, his money, all of it built on the backs of people like us. "And you think he's changed? You think he loves you?" "I do love her," Robert said quietly. "More than I've ever loved anything in my life." "Love." James laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "You want to know about love, Mr. Whitman? Love is what made me disappear from my family's life to keep them safe. Love is what made me spend 18 years in hiding, watching from a distance while my wife worked herself to death and my daughter grew up believing her father abandoned her." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "What exactly have you sacrificed for love?" "Everything," Robert said. "I'm willing to sacrifice everything." Pretty words. But when your business partners force you to choose between their empire and her life, what will you choose then? The question hung in the air like a loaded gun. Alicia looked between the two men, her father, who'd given up everything to protect his family, and Robert, who claimed he'd do the same but hadn't been tested yet. "Maybe," she said carefully, "we should focus on stopping the people who are threatening all of us instead of fighting each other." James turned back to her, his expression softening. "You're right. You're absolutely right, and I'm proud of the woman you've become." He glanced at Agent Chun, who nodded slightly. "I've been working with the FBI to build a case against the people who forced me into hiding. We're close, baby. Really close. But we need evidence of current criminal activity, not just what happened 18 years ago." "What kind of evidence?" Robert asked. "Financial records showing ongoing bribery and corruption. Communication between your current executives and the organized crime families who've been running construction contracts across the South." James's eyes were hard as stone. The kind of evidence that exists in Whitman Enterprises files, if someone with access was willing to find it. Alicia felt Robert stiffen beside her. "You're asking me to betray my own company. I'm asking you to help finish what should have been finished 18 years ago." James stepped closer to his daughter, as close as Agent Chin would allow. "But I need you to understand something, Alicia. These people don't just destroy careers. They eliminate threats. And if they see you as a threat to their operation, they'll kill me," Alicia finished. "They'll kill both of you." James looked at Robert with something that might have been respect, The moment he chose you over his business partners, he signed his own death warrant too. The room fell silent except for the tick of a generic clock on the wall. Outside, Alicia could hear the sound of suburban life. Lawn mowers and barking dogs and children playing. Normal sounds from a normal world that felt a million miles away from federal safe houses and witness protection and choosing between love and survival. "So what do we do?" she asked. James smiled, and for a moment, she saw the man who'd taught her to ride a bike and helped her with math homework and promised her that everything would be okay. "We fight," he said simply. "We gather the evidence, we expose the truth, and we make sure these bastards never hurt another family the way they hurt ours. And if fighting gets us killed, then at least we'll die knowing we stood up for what was right." James's eyes moved to Robert. "If you discovered your family's tragedy was more complex than you believed, would that change how you sought justice? How do you forgive when everyone was both victim and perpetrator?" Her father's final warning cut deep. Robert may love you now, but when his business partners force him to choose between their empire and your life, you'll learn what love really means to a billionaire. Outside, Robert waited in the car, and she realized she was about to test that theory. When corporate wars turn personal, love becomes the most expensive casualty, and Alicia was about to learn exactly what her relationship with Robert Whitman was worth. The emergency board meeting was called for 6 a.m. on a Monday morning, which told Alicia everything she needed to know about how serious the situation had become. She sat in the back of the Whitman Enterprises boardroom, officially there as Robert's strategic analyst, but really there as his backup, his support, his reminder that some things were more important than money. She was also there as his target. "Gentlemen," Robert began, standing at the head of the mahogany table, while 8 of the most powerful men in American construction stared at him like he'd lost his mind. "I've called this meeting to discuss the future of our partnership with certain legacy contractors." Theodore Morrison, the silver-haired executive who'd been with the company since Robert's father's time, leaned back in his leather chair. "If this is about the Harrison Building contract from 20 years ago, those deals are ancient history." "Are they?" Robert clicked a remote, and the wall-mounted screen filled with financial documents. Bank transfers, payment authorizations, bribery receipts. Because according to FBI investigators, some of those ancient relationships are still very much active. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Alicia watched the faces around the table shift from confusion to understanding to something that looked a lot like panic. "Robert," Morrison said carefully, "perhaps we should discuss this privately." "No." Robert's voice carried the kind of authority that had built empires and destroyed them. "We're going to discuss this right here, right now, with full transparency." "Full transparency?" The voice came from the far end of the table, where Vincent Caruso sat in shadows that seemed to follow him wherever he went. Caruso officially ran logistics for Whitman's Southern operations. Unofficially, he was the company's connection to organizations that settled disputes with bullets instead of lawyers. "That's an interesting choice of words," Caruso continued, his eyes sliding to Alicia, "considering you've been sharing company business with people who don't have our best interests at heart." Robert stepped protectively closer to Alicia's chair. "Miss Crawford is a valued employee whose insights have saved this company millions of dollars." "Miss Crawford," Caruso said, still not looking away from her, "is the daughter of a man who tried to destroy this company 18 years ago. Some people might see her employment here as problematic." The threat hung in the air like smoke from a gun. Alicia felt her heart rate spike, but she kept her expression calm. She'd learned long ago not to show fear to predators. "My father," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system, "tried to prevent people from being killed by substandard construction materials. If that's your definition of destructive, then we have very different ideas about what this company should stand for." Caruso's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "Idealistic, just like Daddy. That's enough." Robert's voice could have cut glass. "Miss Crawford is under my personal protection. Anyone who threatens her threatens me." "Personal protection." Morrison shook his head. "Robert, you're letting emotions cloud your judgment. This girl has been here less than 6 months, and already she's caused more disruption than. She's caused more positive change than this company has seen in decades. Robert moved to stand directly behind Alicia's chair, his hands resting on her shoulders in a gesture that was both protective and possessive. The Henderson merger succeeded because of her insights. Our worker safety ratings have improved because of her recommendations. Our profit margins have increased because she sees solutions the rest of us miss. And our legal exposure has skyrocketed, Caruso added smoothly, because she's been feeding information to federal investigators. The silence that followed was absolute. Alicia felt Robert's hands tighten on her shoulders, felt the attention of every man in the room focus on her like laser sights. "That's a serious accusation," Robert said quietly. "It's a serious situation." Caruso pulled out a tablet and swiped through screens until he found what he wanted. "Security footage from your office, Mr. Whitman. 3 nights ago, your strategic analyst accessing your computer after hours, downloading files related to the Harrison building contracts." Alicia's stomach dropped to her shoes as she watched herself on the screen, inserting the thumb drive Sandra had given her, waiting as it copied files that could destroy the men sitting around this table. "The question," Caruso continued, "is what we're going to do about it." Robert's hands were steady on her shoulders, but Alicia could feel the tension radiating through his body. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that problems need to be solved." Caruso's eyes were flat, emotionless. "Permanently. Over my dead body." The words were out of Robert's mouth before anyone could stop them, and the room exploded into chaos. Morrison was shouting about fiduciary responsibility and shareholder interests. 2 other executives were talking over each other about damage control and legal liability. But Caruso just sat in his shadows, watching Robert with the patience of a snake waiting for the right moment to strike. "That," Caruso said when the noise died down, "can be arranged." Robert moved around Alicia's chair to face the table directly, putting himself between her and 8 men who saw her as a threat to be eliminated. "Let me make something very clear," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "Miss Crawford is not going anywhere. Anyone who threatens her will answer to me personally. And if you think I won't burn this entire company to the ground to protect her, then you don't know me as well as you think you do. You destroy a $14 billion empire for one woman?" Morrison asked incredulously. "I destroy 100 empires for this woman." Robert's smile was sharp as a blade. "The question is whether you're willing to destroy yourselves to stop me." As they made love against the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, her back pressed to glass while his empire burned 47 floors below, choosing each other while the world chose to destroy them. When the stakes are life and death, how much would you sacrifice for love? Would you choose someone over security, over safety, over everything you built? Share your thoughts. The ultimatum arrived via courier. Testify against Robert in exchange for her father's continued protection, or watch both men die while she lived with the guilt. She had 24 hours to decide, and Robert still didn't know about the choice she was being forced to make. She had 24 hours to betray the man she loved or lose her father forever. But Alicia Crawford had never been good at following other people's rules. The ultimatum sat on her kitchen counter like a loaded weapon. Testify against Robert, destroy everything they'd built together, and her father would remain safely hidden in witness protection. Refuse, and both men would disappear forever, leaving her with nothing but guilt and blood on her hands. But Alicia had learned something in those Chicago boardrooms that her enemies hadn't counted on. She learned to think 3 moves ahead. "The wire needs to be positioned here," Agent Martinez explained, taping the tiny recording device between her shoulder blades. "If they search you, they won't find it there." Robert paced the safe house living room, his usual composure cracking. "This is insane. You're walking into a room with 3 men who've killed for less than what you know. And that's exactly why they won't expect me to show up," Alicia said, adjusting her blouse over the wire. "They think I'm some scared girl from Mississippi. Let them keep thinking that." Her phone buzzed. Unknown number, as expected. Navy Pier. Warehouse 47. "Come alone, or Daddy gets a permanent vacation." She showed the message to Martinez, who nodded grimly. We'll have agents positioned around the perimeter, but once you're inside, you're on your own until we get enough recorded evidence for arrests. Robert grabbed her hand. There has to be another way. She turned to face him, memorizing the worry lines around his eyes, the way his jaw tightened when he was scared. The only other way ends with you dead and me running for the rest of my life. I'm done running. The kiss they shared tasted like desperation and promises neither of them was sure they could keep. Navy Pier at midnight looked like a graveyard of abandoned dreams. Warehouse 47 squatted between the lake and the city, its broken windows staring blindly at the water. Alicia's heels echoed on wet concrete as she approached the entrance. Inside, 3 men waited in the shadows. She recognized Marcus Chun from newspaper photos, Robert's former business partner, the one who'd orchestrated her father's disappearance. The other 2 were muscle, their faces hard and forgettable. Miss Crawford, Chun said, stepping into the light. Punctual. I respect that in a woman. I'm here. Now, let's get this over with. Chun smiled, the expression cold as winter wind off Lake Michigan. Straight to business. I like that too. You testify that Robert Whitman knowingly participated in contract fraud, money laundering, and witness intimidation. In exchange, your father continues breathing. And if I refuse, then you join him wherever he's hiding. Permanently. The wire pressed against her spine, recording every word. She needed more. Specific admissions, names, details that would put these men away forever. How do I know you'll keep your word? She asked. You had my father disappeared once already. Chen's laugh was ugly. Your daddy got righteous, started asking questions about where our construction money really came from. Said he couldn't live with himself knowing we were using slave labor on government contracts. Perfect. Keep talking, you piece of slave labor, she pressed. Undocumented workers. Debt bondage. Same thing, really. Your father threatened to expose the whole operation to the feds. Cost us millions in contracts. One of the muscle men shifted nervously. Boss, maybe we shouldn't. Shut up, Chun snapped. She's going to testify anyway. Might as well know what she's covering up. He turned back to Alicia. See, your boyfriend Robert was just the pretty face we needed for government contracts. Young, clean, desperate after his daddy died. Easy to manipulate. So Robert didn't know? Oh, he knew enough. Knew we were cutting corners, paying bribes, keeping workers quiet with threats. He just didn't ask the right questions because he was making too much money to care. The wire captured every damning word. Almost enough for arrests. She needed one more push. And when my father threatened to expose everything, Chen's eyes went flat and dangerous. We made him disappear. Would have killed him, but Robert begged us not to. Said he'd do anything to keep your daddy alive. His smile turned predatory. Funny how history repeats itself. Now I'm making the same choice about you. The wire crackled against her skin. A sound only she could hear, but it sent ice through her veins. Problem with wires, Chun continued conversationally, is they're only good if someone's listening on the other end. The 2 muscle men stepped closer, cutting off her escape routes. You really think we didn't know about your little FBI friends? Chun pulled out a signal detector, its red light blinking steadily as it pointed at her. Technology's amazing these days. Alicia's heart hammered against her ribs. The wire was dead. The FBI couldn't hear her. Robert didn't even know the meeting location. She was alone with 3 killers, and no one was coming to save her. But as Chun reached into his jacket, Alicia realized something that made her smile despite the terror clawing at her throat. She learned more than business strategy in those boardrooms. She learned that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone underestimates. You know what I think, she said, taking a step back toward the warehouse wall. What's that, sweetheart? I think you talk too much. The emergency beacon she'd activated when the wire went dead sent her location to every law enforcement agency in Chicago. The warehouse doors exploded inward as federal agents swarmed the building, their shouts echoing off rusted metal and broken dreams. Chen's face went white as he realized he'd confessed everything to a room full of witnesses. Sometimes love makes you brave. And sometimes being brave makes you free. The hardest part about watching everything burn isn't the loss. It's realizing what you're willing to rebuild from the ashes. 6 months after the warehouse arrests, Alicia stood on the courthouse steps watching federal marshals escort Marcus Chun and his associates to prison transport vehicles. The media circus had finally died down to a manageable roar, and justice, for once, had actually been served. How does it feel? Channel 7's reporter shoved a microphone toward her face. Knowing you brought down one of Chicago's biggest corruption scandals? It feels like the beginning, she said simply. Behind her, Robert emerged from the courthouse looking older, but somehow stronger. The man who'd once commanded boardrooms with ruthless efficiency now carried himself with quiet dignity earned through months of testimony, cooperation, and public scrutiny. The federal investigation had stripped Whitman Enterprises down to its bones. Every contract examined, every partnership questioned, every employee interviewed. In the end, they'd saved what mattered: the legitimate construction business, the honest workers, and most importantly, each other. Miss Crawford, Mr. Whitman, another reporter called out. Is it true you're starting a new company together? Robert stepped beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. We'll announce our plans when we're ready. What they didn't announce was how they'd spent the previous night, tangled in hotel sheets, making love with the desperate tenderness of people who'd almost lost everything. The sensation of his mouth on her neck, his hands mapping her body like he was memorizing every curve, her own fingers tracing the scars that stress had etched around his eyes. They claimed each other with a hunger that had nothing to do with power and everything to do with survival. I need to see him, Alicia told Robert as they climbed into the car that would take them away from the courthouse circus. My father. It's time. The federal safe house in suburban Milwaukee looked like any other middle-class home, complete with a white picket fence and roses blooming in the front yard. But the armed marshals stationed discreetly in unmarked cars reminded her that normal was still a luxury her family couldn't afford. James Crawford answered the door himself, and for a moment, 18 years collapsed into nothing. He was older, grayer, with lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent looking over his shoulder. But he was alive, and that was more than she'd dared hope for most of her life. Baby girl, he said, and his voice cracked on the words. She fell into his arms like she was 12 years old again, before the world got complicated, before she learned that loving someone could cost everything. I'm sorry, she whispered against his shoulder. I'm so sorry I didn't find you sooner. You were supposed to be safe, he said, holding her tight enough to hurt. That was the whole point. You were supposed to have a normal life. Normal's overrated, she said, pulling back to look at him. Besides, I think I get my stubborn streak from you. Robert waited by the car, giving them space, but close enough to provide support if she needed it. Her father's eyes followed her gaze. That him? The Whitman boy. He's not a boy anymore, Daddy. And he's not his father. James Crawford studied Robert with the careful attention of a man who'd learned to judge character by survival instincts. He put his neck on the line for you, testified against his own business partners, gave up everything to keep you safe. He loves me. That's what worries me, her father said softly. Rich men's love costs more than poor folks can afford. Not this time. She took his weathered hand in hers. This time, love's the only thing that saved us. They talked for hours, filling in 18 years of silence with words that couldn't possibly be enough. He told her about the night he discovered the human trafficking, the threats that followed, the impossible choice between his daughter's safety and his own conscience. She told him about growing up poor but proud, about the fury that had driven her north to Chicago, about learning to love the man who'd been forced to sign his termination papers. They made him do it, her father said finally. The Whitman boy. His daddy had just died, and Chin threatened to kill him if he didn't cooperate. Kid was 22 years old, scared out of his mind. I know. He told me everything. And you forgave him? She thought about it, really considered the question. I forgave us both. For being human. For making impossible choices in impossible situations. When Robert finally joined them on the porch, James Crawford stood up slowly, like his joints remembered every year of hiding. "Mr. Whitman," he said formally. "James," Robert replied. "I owe you an apology that's about 20 years overdue." "No," her father said, surprising them both. "You were a kid in an impossible situation. You did what you had to do to survive. I understand that better than most." They shook hands, construction worker and former billionaire, connected by the woman they both loved and the choices that had nearly destroyed them all. As the sun set over suburban Milwaukee, Alicia sat between the two most important men in her life and realized something profound. The empire that had fallen hadn't been built on money or power or influence. It had been built on lies. What they were building now, trust, forgiveness, love earned through suffering, that empire would last. "So," Robert said as they prepared to leave, "are you ready to find out what we can build together?" She looked at the courthouse steps where they'd walked away as free people, at her father who'd finally stopped running, at the man who'd chosen love over everything else he'd ever valued. "I've been ready my whole life," she said. "I just didn't know it yet." 6 months after the empire fell, she discovered something more powerful than billions: the ability to build something meaningful from nothing. Crawford Whitman Construction occupied a modest 3-story building in Chicago's South Loop, a far cry from the gleaming tower that had once housed Whitman Enterprises. The lobby had second-hand furniture and coffee-stained carpet, but also had something the old company had never possessed: integrity. Alicia reviewed the morning reports at her desk, their desk, really, since she and Robert had designed the office as true partners. Equal shares, equal say, equal responsibility for every decision that would shape their future. "Henderson Project is ahead of schedule," she told him as he walked in with coffee and the expression of a man who'd learned to find joy in small victories. "The crew says they've never worked for a company that actually cares about safety regulations." "Revolutionary concept," Robert said dryly, settling into his chair across from her. "Treating workers like human beings instead of replaceable parts." The transformation hadn't happened overnight. The first months after the trials had been brutal. Death threats from Chen's remaining associates, media scrutiny that followed them everywhere, former business contacts who treated them like plague carriers. But they'd survived it together, building something new from the wreckage of everything Robert had once believed defined success. "There's something else," Alicia said, pulling out a folder that had arrived that morning. "Investment offer. Enough money to expand nationwide, take on the big federal contract again." Robert reached for it, then stopped when he saw her expression. "What's wrong?" "Look at the signature." His face went pale as he read the letterhead. Meridian Capital Group, the investment firm that Chen's associates had used to launder money through construction contracts. Different names on the corporate documents, same criminal network pulling the strings. "They're not done with us," he said quietly. "No, they're not." She stood up and walked to the window overlooking the construction site where her father now worked as a safety supervisor. "But we're not the same people they tried to destroy." The past 6 months had changed them both in ways that money never could. Robert had learned to measure success in job sites where workers went home safe every night instead of quarterly profit reports. Alicia had discovered that the fury that had driven her north could be transformed into something more powerful: purpose. Their first project had been renovating a community center in her old neighborhood in Mississippi. The building had been condemned for years, but with proper funding and honest labor, they turned it into something beautiful. A place where kids could do homework after school, where adults could learn job skills, where hope had room to grow. The local news had covered the grand opening, but what mattered more were the phone calls that followed. Other communities, other forgotten neighborhoods, other chances to prove that business could be a force for good instead of greed. "We could take the money," Robert said, still staring at the investment offer. "Use it against them. Build something so big and clean that it puts them out of business permanently. Or we could stay small, stay honest, and build something that lasts." He looked at her with the expression that still made her heart race after everything they'd been through. "What do you want to do?" "I want to tear up that contract and take you home and celebrate the fact that we're free to choose our own path." And then And then I want to make love to you like we've got all the time in the world. Because we do. They left the office early that day, driving to the lakefront apartment they'd bought together. Modest by Robert's old standards, luxurious by hers, perfect for them. The evening light, streaming through the windows, caught the ring on her left hand. The simple band Robert had given her 2 weeks earlier with a proposal that was more promise than question. I don't need a wedding to know you're mine, he'd said, but I want the world to know I'm yours. Now, in the privacy of their bedroom, she showed him exactly what belonging to each other meant. She pushed him back against the door they just closed, her confidence earned through months of building something together, making her bold. My company, my rules, she whispered, echoing words from their very first encounter in that Chicago boardroom. But this time, when she took control, it wasn't about power games or corporate dominance. It was about love expressed through touch, trust demonstrated through vulnerability, partnership celebrated through pleasure. She undressed him slowly, mapping the changes that stress and redemption had written on his body. New scars from the assassination attempt that had nearly taken his life, muscles toned by actual labor instead of expensive gym equipment, hands roughened by honest work. He watched her with wonder, like he still couldn't believe she'd chosen him after everything. When she finally joined their bodies together, moving above him in the golden light of their shared bedroom, his hands gripped her hips with reverent desperation. I love you, he said, the words raw with emotion. I love who you are, who we are together, what we're building. I know, she replied, leaning down to kiss him as she rode him toward completion. I love you too, all of you, even the parts that are still broken, especially those parts. Later, wrapped in sheets and contentment, they talked about the future they were creating together. Not just the business, but the life, marriage, maybe children someday, definitely a legacy of treating people with dignity and respect. No regrets? Robert asked, tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. About what? Choosing love over revenge? Building something honest instead of something big? Giving up the chance to be a billionaire's wife for the reality of being your equal partner? All of that. She thought about the girl who'd stepped off that Greyhound bus with nothing but anger and determination. That girl had wanted to destroy Robert Whitman and everything he represented. Instead, she'd save them both. Not a single one, she said, and meant it completely. The past never stays buried forever, but sometimes when it resurfaces, you're strong enough to bury it properly this time. The call came on a Tuesday morning while Alicia was reviewing safety reports from their latest project, a housing development in Detroit that would provide affordable homes for working families. Robert was in Mississippi, overseeing the construction of their second community center, when her phone rang with a number she recognized but had hoped never to see again. Miss Crawford. The voice was smooth, professional, completely at odds with the threat it represented. My name is David Chun. Marcus was my brother. Her blood turned to ice water. What do you want? To make you an offer you shouldn't refuse. I represent certain investors who are very interested in Crawford Whitman construction. We'd like to buy you out. We're not for sale. Everything's for sale, Miss Crawford. It's just a matter of price. The question is whether you prefer to negotiate while you're still breathing or let your next of kin handle the paperwork. The line went dead, leaving her staring at her phone with hands that trembled despite her efforts to stay calm. She speed-dialed Robert immediately. They're back, she said when he answered. Chen's brother. They want to buy us out or shut us down permanently. The silence on his end stretched long enough that she wondered if the call had dropped. Then, I'm coming home. Don't go anywhere alone. Don't meet with anyone you don't know. And call Agent Martinez immediately. Robert, I mean it, Alicia. These people killed my father when he refused to cooperate. They disappeared yours when he threatened their operation. They won't hesitate to eliminate both of us if we stand in their way. But elimination, as it turned out, wasn't their primary strategy this time. Corruption was. The inspection problems started the next week. Suddenly, every Crawford Whitman project was finding code violations that hadn't existed the day before. Permits were being revoked, work orders suspended, safety inspectors discovering issues that would require months to resolve and cost hundreds of thousands to fix. They're trying to bleed us dry, Roberts said, reviewing the latest stack of violation notices. Force us into bankruptcy, so we'll have to sell. Then they underestimated us, Alicia replied, reaching for her phone. Because I learned something from watching you in those boardrooms. Sometimes the best defense is a really good offense. The press conference she called wasn't held in the Crawford Whitman offices or some fancy hotel. Instead, she stood on the construction site where her father was supervising the installation of worker safety equipment that exceeded federal requirements by a significant margin. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, facing the cameras with the confidence of someone who'd learned to find strength in truth. My name is Alicia Crawford, and I'm being targeted by organized crime because my company refuses to participate in corruption. The story she told was carefully edited but damning. The pattern of harassment, the connection to Marcus Chin's criminal network, the systematic attempt to destroy honest businesses that refuse to cooperate with illegal schemes. They want me to sell my company to investors who will use it for money laundering and human trafficking, she continued, her voice carrying across the construction site. I'm here to tell them, and anyone else who thinks they can intimidate working people into silence. Not today. Not ever. Not while I'm breathing. The media explosion was immediate and overwhelming. By evening, Crawford Whitman Construction was trending on social media, with hashtags like #HonestBusiness and #StandUpFightBack spreading faster than their enemies could contain them. More importantly, the federal investigation that had been quietly building a case against Chin's organization suddenly found itself with public support and political pressure to act quickly. The arrest came at dawn 3 days later, coordinated raids across 4 states that netted David Chun and 17 associates. The evidence included recorded phone calls, financial documents, and testimony from workers who'd finally found the courage to speak out against their oppressors. That evening, Alicia and Robert stood in their office, watching the news coverage of the arrests. Federal prosecutors were calling it one of the biggest construction corruption cases in decades. It's over, Robert said, pulling her close. Really over this time. She leaned into his embrace, feeling the tension that had lived in her shoulders for months finally begin to dissolve. You know what this means? What? We can finally plan that wedding without wondering if we'll live to see it. He laughed, the sound rich with relief and joy and love. Is that a proposal, Miss Crawford? That's a demand, Mr. Whitman. I want to marry you in that little church in Mississippi where my grandmother got married. I want my father to walk me down the aisle, and I want to start our honeymoon in that ridiculously expensive hotel suite you booked in New Orleans. And after the honeymoon? After the honeymoon, we come home and build something beautiful. Not just buildings, but a business that proves you can be successful without sacrificing your soul. A legacy that makes the world better instead of just making us richer. He spun her around the office, both of them laughing like children who'd just discovered they were free to play without fear. When he finally set her down, his eyes held promises that had nothing to do with money or power and everything to do with love. You know what I love most about you? He said, framing her face with hands that were no longer soft from privilege, but strong from honest work. What? You make me want to be the man you see when you look at me. And you make me believe I deserve to be loved for exactly who I am. They kissed in their modest office, surrounded by the evidence of everything they'd built together. Safety awards from their construction sites, thank you letters from communities they'd helped, photographs of workers whose lives they'd touched through dignified employment. Outside, Chicago glittered in the darkness, full of corruption and beauty, danger and opportunity. But inside their small empire built on honesty and love, they were finally completely safe. 3 years ago, she stepped off a Greyhound bus with nothing but dreams and determination. Today, she was about to discover that sometimes the best things in life aren't planned. They're chosen every single day. The little white church in Magnolia, Mississippi, hadn't changed much since her grandmother's funeral. The same wooden pews, the same stained glass windows that painted rainbow patterns across worn floorboards, the same sense of peace that had sustained generations of families through joy and heartbreak. But today, instead of mourning, they were celebrating. Alicia stood in the tiny bride's room, adjusting the simple white dress she'd chosen. Elegant but not extravagant, beautiful but not ostentatious. She'd learned the difference between having enough and having too much, and she discovered that enough was actually perfect. "You ready, baby girl?" Her father appeared in the doorway, wearing a suit that fit him better than any uniform he'd worn during his years in hiding. 3 years of freedom had returned color to his face and confidence to his step. "I've been ready since the day I realized love isn't about rescue," she said, taking his offered arm. "It's about recognition." The church was packed with faces that told the story of their journey. Construction workers from their job sites, federal agents who'd helped bring down the criminal network, neighbors from her old neighborhood who'd driven up from the Mississippi Delta to watch little Alicia Crawford marry the former billionaire who'd learned to find his worth in something other than his bank account. Robert waited at the altar wearing a simple black suit and an expression of wonder, like he still couldn't believe she'd chosen him. Behind him stood his best man, not some corporate executive or trust fund friend, but Jake Morrison, the crew chief from their Detroit housing project who'd taught Robert how to swing a hammer without breaking his own thumb. The music began, and Alicia walked down the aisle toward her future, past faces that reflected her own journey from angry victim to empowered woman. Her grandmother would have loved this, she thought. The simplicity, the genuine joy, the way love had grown from the soil of adversity into something strong enough to weather any storm. "Who gives this woman to be married?" the minister asked. "I do," her father said, his voice carrying 18 years of pride and protection. "But she's not being given away. She's choosing her path, same as she's done every day since she was strong enough to walk." The ceremony was brief but meaningful, vows they'd written themselves instead of borrowing someone else's words for promises this important. "I promise to choose you," Alicia said, holding Robert's hands while their families and friends listened to words born from experience instead of fantasy. "Not just today, but every day. When success makes us proud and failure makes us humble. When the world tries to tell us what we should want instead of what we do want. I choose you, and I choose us, and I choose the life we're building one honest decision at a time." Robert's voice was steady, but his hands trembled slightly as he spoke his own promises. "I promise to be worthy of your choice, to build something with you that's stronger than what I could create alone, to love you not for who I want you to be, but for who you are, the woman who saved me by refusing to be saved, who taught me that real power comes from lifting others up instead of keeping them down." The kiss that sealed their marriage tasted like victory and promise, and the simple joy of two people who'd found their way to each other through darkness. The reception was held in the community center they'd built together, the first project of Crawford Whitman Construction and still their favorite. Local women had prepared food, local musicians provided entertainment, and local children ran between the tables with the boundless energy of a generation that would grow up believing hard work and honest dealing could still create prosperity. But the real celebration happened later, in the hotel suite in New Orleans that Robert had indeed booked, where they finally had privacy to express what their hearts had been shouting all day. Their wedding night wasn't desperate or angry like their first encounters had been. There was no power struggle, no emotional warfare disguised as passion. Instead, they made love with the joyful confidence of people who knew they had forever, who'd chosen each other with full knowledge of both strengths and flaws. She moved above him in the lamplight, her body celebrating the promises they'd just made, her hands mapping muscles earned through actual labor instead of expensive gym equipment. He watched her with reverence, his touch worshipful but playful, secure enough in their love to find joy in their physical connection. "Mrs. Whitman," he whispered against her throat as she moved against him, finding the rhythm that belonged only to them. "Mrs. Crawford Whitman," she corrected breathlessly, then laughed at his mock-wounded expression. "Equal partners, remember?" "Equal partners," he agreed, rolling them over so he could look in her eyes as he loved her. In business, in bed, in everything that matters. They came together with gentle intensity, pleasure shared and multiplied instead of taken and given, Two people who'd learned that the best intimacy comes from complete trust. Afterward, wrapped in luxury hotel sheets and contentment, they talked about the future they were creating together. The business was thriving, with projects in 6 states and a reputation for treating workers with dignity. More importantly, they were proving that success and integrity weren't mutually exclusive. "Any regrets?" she asked, tracing the scar on his shoulder from the assassination attempt that had nearly taken his life. "Only that it took me so long to understand what really matters." "And what's that?" "Building something that lasts longer than quarterly reports. Leaving the world better than we found it. Loving someone who makes me want to be worthy of their love." She kissed the scar, then the corner of his mouth, then settled against his chest with a sigh of pure satisfaction. "You know what I realized today?" she said. "What?" "I spent 18 years hating Robert Whitman for destroying my family. But Robert Whitman was just a scared kid making impossible choices. The man I married today, he's someone completely different. Someone I helped create, just like he helped create me. We created each other, and now we get to create whatever comes next." Outside their window, New Orleans glittered in the darkness, full of music and mystery and possibility. But inside their room, wrapped in each other's arms and the certainty of love freely chosen, they were already home.